Thank you, Christopher. And now in other news, the National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPA, is reporting that 42 prosecutions and 27 convictions have been effected for breaches of the Natural Resources Conservation Authority Plastic Packaging Materials Prohibition Order 2018 since the institution of the ban on select categories of single-use plastics 2 years ago. This was disclosed by Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, Colonel Charles Jr., during the House of Representatives sitting, who said that to date, the agency has spent approximately $45 million over the last 3 years on heightening public education and awareness in facilitating behavioral change.
The ban has been supported by an intense public education and awareness campaign led by NEPA, which will now be revitalized to support Phase 3 of the ban. Madam Speaker, I call on all stakeholders to partner with the government in spreading the message. Each one, teach one. To date, the agency has expended approximately $45 million over the last 3 years on public education and raising awareness in facilitating behavior change. Since the institution of the ban in January 2019, NEPA has reported that there have been 42 prosecutions and 27 convictions under the NRCA prohibition order. And the NEPA, as well as the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority and Jamaica Customs Agency, will continue to monitor and enforce the ban. Let me just say, Madam Speaker and colleagues, insofar as we will be applying enforcement, it is essential that Jamaicans across this country are encouraged and understand that they need to participate in achieving this outcome. And so, even more than enforcement, we will be continuing the education and raising of awareness so that we understand that this is essential to our own existence as a country.
Now, with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, Minister Charles Jr. says a 6-month transitional period has been given to the private and public sector to fully comply with the ban, pointing out that thereafter, business owners will be prosecuted if found in breach of the ban.
We have held intense discussions with the relevant public sector agencies and private sector stakeholders leading up to Phase 3 of the ban. In light of this, and based on the request by members of the private sector, the government decided that we instituted a 6-month transition period before fully effecting enforcement of the ban. And within this period, we expect that the private sector will deplete or replace all affected products currently circulated in the trade, that they will ensure that their production processes are retrofitted as appropriate to facilitate compliance with the provisions of the ban, and that the public sector will ramp up its public education and awareness raising activities. Thereafter, Madam Speaker, the government intends to institute prosecutions in the parish courts for all persons found in breach of the orders. In this regard, we have welcomed and continue to welcome the public's recommendations and feedback. Madam Speaker, in this time of unprecedented challenge, the government will now more than ever require the cooperation and support of all facets of society, particularly the general public, in assisting in the fight against plastic pollution. To get more information on the ban, we indicate that the public can contact the hotline hosted by NEPA at 876-285-8531 or through email at policyonplasticban@nepa.gov.jm.
Meanwhile, Minister Charles Jr. disclosed that the government is exploring measures that can be incorporated in the management of polyethylene and polypropylene containers that have replaced the expanded polystyrene foam containers on the domestic markets.
We are currently exploring the measures that may be applied to the management of polyethylene and polypropylene containers that have replaced the expanded styrofoam containers on the domestic market, and we acknowledge that this is an issue of concern. Several options are being explored, including the establishment of a national recycling program which will include these products, the provision of incentives to the private sector to make environmentally friendly alternatives more attractive, and the expansion of the existing ban to cover also these products.
On January 1, 2020, the government imposed a ban on the local manufacture, distribution, and use of expanded polystyrene foam products used in the food and beverage industry. Meanwhile, Charles Jr. said another tool to regulate single-use plastics is the institution of a deposit refund scheme.
Another tool in the government's toolbox, Madam Speaker and colleagues, to regulate single-use plastics is the use of the deposit refund scheme. The government recognizes that the issue with plastics and microplastics in the country will not be fully addressed with the implementation of the current ban on single-use plastics. It's not an all-in-all solution. The majority of the plastic waste generated in the country is from plastic bottles, specifically the PET bottles. As had been previously announced, the government has charged the private sector-led Recycling Partners of Jamaica Limited with the implementation of the deposit refund scheme on plastic bottles. And we are also encouraging other private sector partners to get involved.
He pointed out that the rebate will be calculated per bottle and not per pound as currently obtained.
The deposit refund scheme, Madam Speaker, will allow for the application of a deposit on plastic bottles placed on the market and a cash rebate to the consumer on the return of these bottles to designated redemption centers across the island. This rebate will be per bottle and not per pound as currently obtains. The deposit refund scheme will be implemented in keeping with per annum recovery rates established by the government in consultation with the private sector and other key stakeholders. Our goal is to incentivize the deposit refund scheme as a means of minimizing the plastic pollution while offering employment opportunities. The government is cognizant that the DRS is eagerly awaited by all and intends to ensure that it is efficiently and effectively implemented in short order.
And that's our news package for you tonight. Thank you for tuning in to Mello TV Evening News at 8. I am Shelley Ann Hill. Stay safe and pleasant viewing.